There was a man who could fly, a man so physically gifted that in the Philippines they didn't just cheer for him, they worshipped him like a living god. He had the world at his feet, the money, the women, the fame of a king. But fast forward just a few years, and that same man is lying face down on the freezing floor of a New Jersey gas station, handcuffed, broken, and clutching a knife. They called him Black Superman. He was the NBA's most explosive secret. But while other legends were building empires, Billy Ray Bates was building his own personal hell. How does a superstar go from scoring 50 points a game to waking up in a prison cell, erased from history? Today, we are opening the case file that the sports world tried to bury. This isn't just a story about basketball, it's a story about a rise so high and a fall so catastrophic, it's hard to believe it's real. We are going to look past the highlights and into the shadows, the alcohol, the scandals, and the terrifying silence that followed the roar of the crowd. Get ready, because the story of Billy Ray Bates is the most heartbreaking American tragedy you've never been told. The date is January 17th, 1998. It is a bitterly cold winter night in New Jersey. The wind cuts through the streets, but inside a small Texaco gas station, the air is stagnant and smells of old coffee and gasoline. The clerk behind the counter is tired, watching the clock tick, waiting for his shift to end. The door chimes. A man walks in. He is wearing a ski mask, a dark coat that has seen better days, and he is shaking. Not just from the cold, but from something else, something internal. In his hand, he grips a knife. It is not the steady hand of a professional criminal. It is the trembling hand of a desperate soul. He demands money. He is frantic, sweating despite the freezing temperature outside. The clerk is terrified, emptying the register. But look closely at the man in the mask. Look at his frame. He stands just over 6 feet 3 inches. His shoulders are broad. His movement, even in this moment of absolute rock bottom, hints at a physical power that once defied the laws of physics. This man, terrorizing a minimum wage worker for a handful of cash, was once the king of Oregon. Just 15 years prior, 20,000 people would scream his name until their throats bled. Just 15 years prior, he was earning huge checks and flying first class. How did we get here? How does a black Superman turn into a trembling shadow in a ski mask? The police sirens wail in the distance. The man runs, but he does not run fast enough. When the officers tackle him to the frozen pavement, they do not see a legend. They see just another statistic. But as they pull the mask off, the tragedy becomes clear. The face pressing against the asphalt belongs to Billy Ray Bates, and as the handcuffs click shut, the echo of roaring stadiums is replaced by the cold, metallic sound of justice. This was not just a robbery. It was the final, deafening crash of a man who fell from the heavens. To understand how a man falls that far, we must first understand where he rose from. And believe me, he started from the absolute bottom. Billy Ray was born in 1956 in Kosciuszko, Mississippi. Now, when I say Mississippi in the 50s, I need you to understand the picture. This was the deep, sweltering South. The air was thick with humidity and the heavy legacy of hardship. Billy Ray was the 8th of 9 children, 9 mouths to feed. His family were sharecroppers. For those of you who do not know, sharecropping is a polite word for endless, back-breaking labor that barely keeps you alive. From the moment he could walk, Billy Ray was in the fields, picking cotton. Imagine the sun beating down on your neck, hour after hour, day after day. Your fingers bleeding from the sharp bowls of cotton. Most people would break under this pressure. But for Billy Ray, this hellish labor became his gym. He did not have weights. He did not have personal trainers or nutritionists. He had heavy sacks of cotton and the unforgiving earth. Locals whispered about him even then. They said the boy had unnatural strength. There were rumors that he could lift the back end of a tractor by himself. Whether that is true or just a legend, one thing was undeniable. His body was built for something greater than farming. His only escape was a makeshift basketball hoop. And when I say makeshift, I mean a bicycle rim nailed to the side of an old wooden barn. No net, no pavement, just dirt and dust. Every time he jumped, he had to land on uneven ground. Maybe that is where he learned to fly. He had to jump higher than anyone else just to escape the reality of his life. He played in his work boots because he did not have sneakers. Can you imagine? Developing a 40-inch vertical leap in heavy work boots? It sounds impossible, but Billy Ray Bates was never about what was possible. He was about survival. He played until the sun went down and the only light came from the moon. In those moments, covered in the dust of the fields, he wasn't a poor sharecropper's son. He was a giant. But nobody outside of that tiny town knew his name. Yet. When it came time for college, you would expect scouts from all over the country to be lining up at his door, right? Wrong. The major universities, the ones with the big television contracts and the shiny arenas, they completely ignored him. Why? Perhaps because he was from the middle of nowhere, perhaps because he didn't have the polish they were looking for. So Billy Ray ended up at Kentucky State University. This was an astonishingly talented school, but it was hidden from the national spotlight. And there the legend truly began to grow, albeit in the dark. On the court, he was a monster. He averaged 25 points per game. Let me repeat that. 25 points. He was tearing defenses apart with a ferocity that was terrifying to watch. He didn't just dunk the ball, he attacked the rim as if it owed him money. He played with a chip on his shoulder the size of a boulder. He was angry. Angry at the poverty, angry at being overlooked, angry at the world. And he channeled all that rage into the game. But it was at Kentucky State that the other side of Billy Ray began to emerge. You see, talent is a dangerous thing when it is not accompanied by discipline. While he was dominating on the court, whispers began to circulate about his life off the court. He was the big man on campus. And with that status came temptations that a boy from the cotton fields had never seen before. The parties, the attention, the feeling that rules did not apply to him. He was a star, but he was a star in a galaxy that nobody was watching. He would miss practices. He would show up late. But then he would go out and score 30 points, and everyone would forgive him. This was the beginning of a fatal pattern. The enablers started to appear, people who would cover for him, people who would hand him a drink instead of a playbook. He was learning a dangerous lesson, that his talent was a get-out-of-jail-free card. He thought he was invincible. He thought the party would never end. But the shadows were already lengthening, and the demons were patiently waiting for their turn to play. In 1978, the Houston Rockets made a phone call that changed Billy Ray's life, or so he thought. They drafted him in the 3rd round. For a kid who grew up with dirt floors and cotton sacks, this was the golden ticket. He arrived in Houston with dreams bigger than the Texas sky. He thought he had made it. He thought the hard part was over. But the NBA is a cruel business, my friends. Before the season even truly began, the Rockets cut him, just like that. They took one look at his raw, unpolished style, his lack of professionalism, and they sent him packing. They didn't see a star, they saw a liability. Can you imagine the devastation? To taste the champagne and then be kicked back into the gutter? Billy Ray didn't go back to the cotton fields, but where he ended up might have felt even colder. He found himself in the Continental Basketball Association, playing for the Maine Lumberjacks. Now, let me paint a picture of the CBA in the late 70s. This wasn't the glamorous G League we know today. This was purgatory. We are talking about long, freezing bus rides through snowstorms that would freeze your bones. We are talking about high school gymnasiums with leaky roofs and barely enough heat to keep your muscles loose. The pay? Pitiful. Enough for a burger and a cheap motel room, but not much else. For a man from the humid heat of Mississippi, Maine was a frozen wasteland. But it was in this frozen hell that Billy Ray Bates turned up the heat. He didn't just play, he unleashed a fury on the league. He was averaging nearly 30 points a game. He was dunking on plumbers and teachers who were trying to play pro ball. He was a man among boys, a shark in a goldfish bowl. He was angry, and every time he touched the ball, he punished the rim for Houston's mistake. And then the phone rang again. It was the Portland Trail Blazers. They were desperate. Their season was slipping away. Their stars were injured, and they needed a miracle. They didn't care about his attitude or his raw skills. They needed points. They offered him a 10-day contract, 10 days to prove he belonged, 10 days to change his destiny. Billy Ray packed his bag, left the snow of Maine, and boarded a plane to Oregon. He didn't know it yet, but he was flying straight into the eye of a hurricane. When Billy Ray Bates landed in Portland in February of 1980, nobody knew who he was. The fans looked at the roster and saw a name they didn't recognize. "Who is this guy?" they asked. "Another reject from the minor leagues?" He didn't look like a typical NBA player. He wasn't 7 feet tall. He wasn't lanky. He was built like a linebacker, thick and muscular, standing at 6'4". But the moment he stepped onto the court at the Memorial Coliseum, the questions stopped and the jaws dropped. I want you to visualize this moment. The Blazers were struggling. The crowd was quiet, almost bored. Then, number 12 checks in. Within minutes, the energy in the arena shifted. Bates got the ball on the wing. He took one dribble, 2 steps, and then he launched. He didn't just jump, he ascended. It looked like he was walking on air. He slammed the ball through the hoop with such violence that the backboard shook for seconds afterward. The sound was like a gunshot. The crowd erupted. This wasn't just a basket, it was a statement. "I am here," it screamed. Over the next few weeks, Bates mania swept through the city like a wildfire. He was electric. He was unpredictable. He would shoot from 30 feet. He would crash the boards. He would dive for loose balls until his knees were bloody. The fans fell in love. They saw themselves in him, a blue-collar guy working harder than everyone else. The media couldn't get enough. They called him Black Superman because it seemed like gravity didn't apply to him. He was averaging huge numbers off the bench, winning games almost single-handedly. He went from a guy who couldn't pay his rent to the most popular man in Oregon. But amidst the roar of the crowd and the flashbulbs of the cameras, a dangerous seed was planted. Billy Ray began to believe the hype. He began to believe that he could do no wrong. And when you are a Superman, you start to think you don't need to follow the rules of mortals. If the regular season was the introduction, the 1980 playoffs were the main event. The Blazers were facing the Seattle Supersonics, the defending NBA champions. Seattle had a team full of disciplined veterans, stars who knew how to win. Portland had, they had Billy Ray Bates. Most experts predicted a slaughter. They said the Sonics would sweep the Blazers aside, but they didn't account for the X factor. In that series, Billy Ray Bates played basketball from another dimension. He averaged 25 points per game. Let that sink in. 25 points against the best defense in the league. In Game 4, he was unstoppable. He was hitting shots with hands in his face. He was driving into the paint and finishing over giants. There is a famous story from that series where a Seattle defender, completely exhausted, looked at his coach and just shrugged, as if to say, "What do you want me to do?" He's not human. Bates wasn't running plays. He was running on pure instinct and adrenaline. He broke rookie records. He outscored legends. For a brief, shining moment, he was arguably the best player on the planet. The city of Portland was in hysterics. They had found their savior. But look closely at the footage from those games. Look at his eyes. There is a wildness there, a manic energy. While the city celebrated, Billy Ray was celebrating too hard. The high of the game was being replaced by other highs off the court. The money from that playoff run was substantial, and for a guy who grew up with nothing, it felt like infinite wealth. He started buying drinks for the whole bar. He started surrounding himself with people who didn't care about his career, only his wallet. The tragedy of Billy Ray Bates is that his greatest triumph on the court was happening at the exact same moment his personal life was beginning to crack. He was standing on top of the mountain, beating his chest, not realizing that the ground beneath him was made of sand, and the landslide was about to begin. While Billy Ray Bates was defying gravity inside the Memorial Coliseum, he was defying common sense outside of it. The city of Portland in 1980 wasn't just rain and coffee, it had a nightlife, and Billy Ray decided he was going to be its king. But this wasn't the lifestyle of a disciplined professional athlete. This was the lifestyle of a rock star who knew the tour bus was about to crash. The legends about his nights in Oregon are almost as famous as his dunks. We are talking about a man who didn't just enjoy a drink, he chased oblivion. Witnesses from that era describe a chaotic scene. Bates would walk into a bar, and the room would freeze. Then the cheers would start. He was the hero, the man who dropped 25 points on the champs. He would smile that wide country smile and open a tab that could feed a family for a month. He was surrounded by what we call leeches, people who didn't care about Billy Ray the human being, but loved Billy Ray the wallet. They patted him on the back, poured him another glass of his favorite whiskey and cola, and told him he was untouchable. And the tragedy is, he believed them. He was a simple young man from the cotton fields, suddenly thrust into a world of neon lights and false friends. He didn't have the tools to say no. There are stories, some verified, some whispered, that are hard to believe. They say he would stay out until 4 in the morning, stumbling out of a club as the sun came up, and then show up to the arena a few hours later. Any normal human would be in a coma. But Billy Ray? He would put on that jersey, lace up his sneakers, and somehow, miraculously, score 20 points. It was baffling. It was a slap in the face to every player who ate right and slept 8 hours a night. But this superpower was actually a curse. Because he could perform while living recklessly, he never felt the need to stop. He thought the party would last forever. He didn't realize that every drink was borrowing happiness from tomorrow, and the debt was about to come due with terrifying interest. The hangover finally arrived in the 1981 season. The Portland Trail Blazers were coached by Dr. Jack Ramsay. Now, you have to understand who Jack Ramsay was. He was a man of discipline, a fitness fanatic, a tactical genius who wore plaid pants and demanded perfection. He was the absolute opposite of Billy Ray Bates. It was oil and water. It was fire and ice. At first, Ramsay tolerated the chaos because Bates was winning games. But as the season wore on, the cracks turned into canyons. The reports from the locker room were grim. Bates started missing practices, not just being 5 minutes late, but vanishing. When he did show up, he was often sluggish, his eyes bloodshot, the smell of the previous night seeping through his pores. There is a heartbreaking story about teammates finding him asleep on the trainer's table minutes before tip-off, completely exhausted from his extracurricular activities. To Ramsay, this was the ultimate disrespect. The coach tried to help him. The organization tried to guide him. But Billy Ray was already losing the battle against his inner demons. He was becoming paranoid, feeling like the team was against him, when in reality, they were just trying to save his career. Despite all this, when he was on the court, he was still electric. He averaged high numbers in limited minutes. The fans still screamed, "Bates, Bates," whenever he stood up from the bench. They didn't see the tension. They didn't see the eye rolls from the veterans who were tired of his drama. They just saw the dunks. But inside the organization, the decision was being made. He was labeled a cancer, a distraction. And in the NBA, talent gets you in the door, but character keeps you in the room. Billy Ray was burning bridges faster than he could build them. The Black Superman was starting to look less like a hero and more like a liability. The end came swiftly, and it was brutal. In 1982, the Portland Trail Blazers, the team that had given him his wings, cut him loose. It sent shockwaves through the fan base. "How could you fire the most exciting player in the league?" they cried. But the executives knew the truth. They knew they were sitting on a ticking time bomb. Billy Ray was devastated. He felt betrayed. He didn't understand that his actions had consequences. He thought the points on the scoreboard were the only thing that mattered. He bounced to the Washington Bullets. He lasted barely a month. Then the Los Angeles Lakers gave him a look. Imagine that, Billy Ray Bates in the glamorous Showtime Lakers era. But that team was run by Pat Riley, another strict disciplinarian. Bates played a handful of games, showed flashes of his old brilliance, but it was the same old story off the court. He couldn't follow the rules. He couldn't stay away from the nightlife. The Lakers cut him. He was waived. And then, silence. The phone stopped ringing. At the age of 27, in what should have been the absolute prime of his physical life, Billy Ray Bates was blacklisted. The word was out, do not touch this guy. It wasn't that he couldn't play. Everyone knew he could score on anyone. It was that he was unmanageable. The realization must have been crushing. He went from flying first class to sitting on his couch, watching the games on TV, wondering where it all went wrong. The money was drying up. The friends who drank his whiskey disappeared as soon as the checks stopped coming. He was alone in America, a fallen star with no safety net. But just as the darkness seemed absolute, a strange, exotic lifeline appeared from the other side of the world, a place where they didn't care about his reputation, only his legend. The Philippines were calling. By 1983, Billy Ray Bates was sitting in America, staring at a phone that refused to ring. The NBA had closed its doors. The Continental League felt beneath him. He was a man without a country. But then, a call came from a place he likely couldn't even find on a map, the Philippines. Now, you have to understand something about the Philippines. In that country, basketball is not just a sport, it is a religion. It is woven into the fabric of daily life. They don't just watch the game, they live it, breathe it, and bleed for it. And they were looking for a Messiah. When Billy Ray stepped off the plane in Manila, the humidity hit him like a physical wall. But it wasn't just the heat that overwhelmed him, it was the reception. He wasn't walking into a foreign country as a stranger, he was walking into a coronation. The team was the Crispa Redmanizers. Even the name sounds legendary, doesn't it? They were the dynasties of the Philippine Basketball Association, the PBA. They were the New York Yankees of Asia. And they needed a star to secure their legacy. Billy Ray thought he was just going there to pick up a paycheck, play some ball against smaller guys, and go home. He was wrong. From the moment his sneakers touched the tarmac, he was mobbed. People were screaming his name. Cameras were flashing blindly. He looked around, perhaps confused, perhaps amused. In America, he was a problem child, a risk. Here, he was royalty. He was the black Superman in the flesh. For a man whose ego had been bruised and battered by the NBA executives, this adoration was the ultimate drug. He didn't know it yet, but he had just walked into a golden cage, a paradise that would give him everything he ever wanted, and then slowly take it all away. If you think Michael Jordan was the first player to have a sneaker cult, you haven't heard the story of Billy Ray Bates in Manila. In the mid-'80s, if you walked down the streets of Quezon City or Makati, you would see kids running around in sneakers called Grosby. And on the side of those shoes, stamped in bold letters, was the name Billy Ray Bates. He was so big, so monumental, that a local shoe company made him the face of their brand. Poor kids would save their lunch money for weeks just to buy a pair, believing that if they wore them, maybe, just maybe, they could fly like him. And fly he did. The statistics from his time in the PBA are simply laughable. We are talking about video game numbers. He averaged 46 points per game. Let me say that again, 46. In one game, he dropped 64 points. He wasn't playing against scrubs. He was playing against other American imports, guys who had played Division I college ball. But against Bates? They looked like children. He was physically overpowering. He was thicker, stronger, and faster than anyone on the court. He would drive to the basket with the force of a freight train, and defenders would literally bounce off him. The Araneta Coliseum, the legendary Big Dome, would shake when he played. 25,000 people packed shoulder to shoulder chanting, "Bates, Bates, Bates." The noise was deafening. He would hang in the air for what seemed like seconds, pumping the ball, and then slam it down with a ferocity that threatened to tear the rim off the backboard. He was giving the people a show they had never seen before. He was a gladiator in a modern coliseum. But behind the 60-point games and the sneaker commercials, the Superman cape was starting to fray. The adoration was absolute, and for a man with Billy Ray's specific weaknesses, absolute adoration is absolutely dangerous. If Portland was a party, Manila was a carnival that never closed. Billy Ray Bates found himself in a city that never sleeps, surrounded by people who wanted to be part of his glow. In the Philippines, the concept of hospitality is legendary. But for a superstar athlete with impulse control issues, it was a recipe for disaster. He was treated like a visiting head of state. He didn't pay for meals. He didn't pay for drinks. He walked into the most exclusive nightclubs, and the owners would clear out VIP sections just for him. The good life swallowed him whole. We are talking about a lifestyle that would make rock stars blush. The local beer, San Miguel, flowed like water. And it wasn't just beer, it was the hard stuff. The whiskey. The rumors about his nightlife became folklore. Stories circulated about him partying until 5 in the morning, stumbling out of a club with a different woman on each arm, and then heading straight to the arena. And the worst part? He would still go out and score 50 points. This was the tragedy of his talent. Because he could perform at such a high level while being physically compromised, he never felt the consequences. His body was so gifted that it masked the damage he was doing to it. He was living in a bubble of invincibility. Wealthy businessmen wanted to be his friend, plying him with gifts and favors. Women flocked to him. He was the king of the archipelago. But while he was conquering the court, he was losing the war for his own soul. He was gaining weight. His eyes were often glassy during timeouts. The discipline that had been tenuous in the NBA was non-existent here. He was surrounded by yes men who laughed at his jokes and filled his glass, leading him further and further away from the athlete he was supposed to be. The lights of Manila were bright, but they were blinding him to the cliff edge he was walking toward. If the nights in Manila were long, the list of Billy Ray's conquests was even longer. In the Philippines, he was not just a basketball player, he was a symbol of virility, power, and foreign allure. The local press, always hungry for a story, followed him like a pack of wolves. They didn't just report on his dunks, they reported on who was leaving his hotel room at dawn. The rumors were relentless. They said he had a different woman for every day of the week, and twice on Sundays. He was living the fantasy that every man in the barbershop whispered about. But for Billy Ray, it was just another Tuesday. He didn't just visit the Philippines, he consumed it. There is a famous story about him eating balut. For those who don't know, balut is a fertilized duck egg with a partially developed embryo inside. It is a delicacy, but for most Westerners, it is a challenge. Billy Ray? He cracked it open, sprinkled some salt on it, and downed it with a San Miguel beer while the locals cheered. He wanted to be one of them. He wanted to be the man of the people, and they loved him for it. He would walk the streets of the poorest neighborhoods, shaking hands, laughing, his massive frame towering over everyone. He was accessible. He wasn't hiding in a mansion. He was right there in the mix. But this accessibility had a dark side. The boundaries were gone. He was surrounded by people who wanted a piece of the Black Superman. There were whispers of paternity suits, of angry fathers, of jealous boyfriends. The chaos of his personal life began to bleed into the locker room. He would show up with scratches on his arms or looking like he hadn't slept in 3 days. He was burning the candle at both ends, and then he threw the candle into a bonfire. He was running on adrenaline and the adoration of a nation, but the human body, even a body as magnificent as his, has a breaking point. He was treating his life like a limitless expense account, not realizing that the bill was being tallied up in the shadows. By the mid-'80s, the cracks in the foundation were becoming impossible to ignore. The Crispa Redmanizers, the team that had brought him in, eventually folded, and Billy Ray moved on to playing for Ginebra San Miguel. This was the team of the masses, the barangay, and his legend grew even larger. But so did his waistline. The endless supply of alcohol and rich food was taking its toll. He was heavier now. The explosion in his legs was still there, but it was coming in shorter bursts. He wasn't flying as high. He was relying on brute force. The turning point wasn't a single game. It was a slow, painful erosion of trust. The team management, who had once looked the other way when he missed practice, began to lose patience. You see, when you are scoring 50 points, you can do whatever you want. But when you start scoring 30 and your team is losing, the excuses stop working. There were nights when he was visibly intoxicated on the bench. There were games where he would get ejected for fighting referees, his temper flaring out of control because his body couldn't do what his mind wanted it to. The Black Superman was looking mortal. Eventually, the call came down from the high offices. The Philippines, the country that had adopted him, decided they could no longer enable him. It was a heartbreaking divorce. The fans were devastated, but the executives knew the truth. Billy Ray Bates was a liability. He was cut, sent packing. Imagine the humiliation. He had been kicked out of the NBA for his behavior, and now he was being kicked out of the PBA, a league that usually tolerated anything for talent, for the exact same reason. He boarded a plane back to the United States, leaving behind a legacy of broken backboards and broken hearts. He was leaving the only place on earth where he was still a god, returning to a land where he was just a memory. Landing back in the United States must have felt like landing on the moon. The silence was deafening. In Manila, he couldn't walk down the street without causing a traffic jam. In New Jersey, he could walk for miles, and nobody would even look up. He was just a tall, middle-aged man in a worn-out coat. The transition was brutal. The adrenaline of the arena was gone, replaced by the crushing boredom of regular life. And then there was the money, or rather, the lack of it. Where did all those checks go? The contracts, the sneaker deals, the bonuses? They were gone. Evaporated into the humid air of Filipino nightclubs, poured into glasses of expensive whiskey, and borrowed by friends who were no longer answering his calls. Billy Ray Bates, one of the most talented athletes of his generation, was broke. He didn't have a college degree, he didn't have a trade. All he knew was how to put a ball in a hoop, and nobody wanted to pay him to do that anymore. He tried to reconnect with his family, but the years of absence and neglect had built walls that were too high to climb. He was a stranger in his own home. He drifted. He moved from couch to couch. The alcohol, which used to be a way to celebrate, became a way to survive the day. It was his anesthesia. He started drinking not to feel good, but to stop feeling bad, to stop thinking about the roar of the crowd that was fading in his memory. He was slipping through the cracks of society. The Black Superman was losing his identity, stripping away the layers of the legend until all that was left was a man with a thirst he couldn't quench and a future he couldn't face. If you think the fall from the NBA was hard, the fall from society was catastrophic. By the late 90s, Billy Ray Bates was no longer just unemployed, he was untethered. He was living a life that most of us turn away from when we see it on the street. He was bouncing between cheap motels and the couches of people who were slowly losing their patience. And when the couches ran out, there was the asphalt. Picture this. The man who once had a 40-inch vertical leap, who could look down into the rim, was now sleeping on the floor. His body, once a temple of athletic perfection, was now a vessel for cheap liquor. He wasn't drinking the smooth, aged whiskey of his Manila days anymore. He was drinking whatever he could get his hands on, just to numb the noise in his head. The Black Superman was walking the streets of New Jersey in the dead of winter, shivering not just from the cold, but from withdrawal. And then there is the incident that truly marks the point of no return. It is a story so gruesome, so bizarre, that it sounds like fiction. But it is the chilling truth. In a bar, amidst a haze of intoxication and despair, Billy Ray took a knife and slashed his own ear. Why? Was it a Van Gogh moment of madness? Was it a cry for help? Or was it just the chaotic, flailing act of a man who no longer recognized himself in the mirror? He was spiraling into a darkness so deep that physical pain was the only thing that felt real. He was screaming for the world to look at him, to see the pain behind the eyes of a fallen idol. But the world had already changed the channel. This brings us back to that freezing night in January 1998, the absolute rock bottom. Billy Ray was desperate. He had no money, no home, and a thirst that was burning a hole in his soul. He didn't plan a sophisticated heist. He didn't have a getaway driver or a master plan. He just had a knife and a terrifying need for cash. He walked into that Texaco gas station in New Jersey. Imagine the tragic irony. This was a man whose hands used to perform magic with a basketball, hands that were insured for millions, hands that signed thousands of autographs. And now, those same hands were shaking, gripping a blade, threatening a terrified clerk for a pitiful amount of money. It wasn't about greed. It was about survival. It was about getting just enough for the next bottle. When he ran out of that station, he didn't run like an athlete. He ran like a hunted animal. The police caught him quickly. He was cornered near a local deli. When they put the cuffs on him, he didn't fight. The fight had left him years ago. Can you imagine the police report? Suspect apprehended. Name? Billy Ray Bates. Occupation? Former NBA star. It must have looked like a typo to the officers booking him. How does a man who played against Magic Johnson end up mugging a gas station attendant? It was the final, humiliating headline in a career that deserved so much better. The Black Superman was now just inmate number 29,334. The judge didn't care about his dunking ability. He didn't care about the records in the Philippines. He saw a man who committed armed robbery. Billy Ray was sentenced to 7 years. 7 years. That is a lifetime for an athlete. He was sent to Bayside State Prison. The iron doors slammed shut, and for the first time in decades, the cheering stopped. Inside those walls, Billy Ray Bates was forced to do something he hadn't done since he was a teenager. He had to face himself sober. There was no alcohol in prison. There were no fans to stroke his ego. There was just the relentless routine of incarceration. Waking up, roll call, meals, lockup. He was surrounded by hard men, criminals who didn't care that he used to play for the Portland Trail Blazers. To them, he was just another guy in a jumpsuit. But in a strange way, prison might have saved his life. If he had stayed on the streets, the bottle would have likely claimed him for good. In prison, his body had a chance to dry out. He started playing basketball in the prison yard. Can you imagine that scene? Inmates gathering around the hoop on the cracked concrete, watching an aging, graying man still rise up and throw it down. For a few minutes a day, amidst the barbed wire and the guard towers, he was Superman again. But when the whistle blew, he went back to his cell, staring at the ceiling, wondering how a king ended up in a cage. Those 7 years were a silent, brutal meditation on wasted talent and the unforgiving nature of time. The year is 2005. The heavy iron gates of Bayside State Prison slide open, and Billy Ray Bates steps out into the sunlight. He is 49 years old. The world he is walking back into is not the same world he left. The NBA has changed. It is the era of LeBron James and Kobe Bryant now. The gritty, high-flying, hard-partying days of the 80s are ancient history. And Billy Ray? He is a relic, a ghost from a forgotten time. Imagine the disorientation. For 7 years, his life was dictated by bells and guards. Now, he has absolute freedom, but freedom is terrifying when you have nothing to fill it with. He has no money, no home. His knees are shot. The explosive jump that made him a legend is gone, replaced by the stiffness of age and hard living. He is just another ex-convict trying to navigate a society that doesn't forgive easily. He tries to stay straight. He really does. He finds odd jobs, labor that is beneath his talent but necessary for survival. He sweeps floors, he pumps gas, the cruelest irony of all, returning to the very setting of his downfall. But the silence is the loudest part. There are no cheering fans, no reporters asking for quotes, just the hum of traffic and the cold reality of a lonely apartment. He is sober, forced into clarity by the system. But clarity can be painful when all you see is a wasted legacy. He is a man walking through a museum of his own failures, touching the glass but unable to change the exhibits. But then, in 2011, the impossible happens. The phone rings. It is the Philippines calling. Again. They haven't forgotten. In a move that feels like a Hollywood script, the Philippine Basketball Association announces that they want to induct Billy Ray Bates into their Hall of Fame. They want him to come back. They want to give him a job as a skills coach for the Philippine Patriots. Can you feel the weight of this moment? A man who was rotting in a prison cell just a few years ago is now being flown across the ocean to be honored as a hero. When he lands in Manila, it is like 1983 all over again. The cameras are there. The fans are there, older now, holding up faded posters in those old Grosby sneakers. They chant his name. Black Superman returns. It is a redemption arc that brings tears to your eyes. Billy Ray is overwhelmed. He weeps openly. He tells the press he is a changed man. He says he has defeated his demons. He takes the job with the Patriots, teaching young Filipino players how to attack the rim, how to be fearless. For a few beautiful months, it looks like the story will have a happy ending. He is back in his kingdom, respected, employed, and loved. He is the wise elder statesman, the cautionary tale turned success story. The Philippines was ready to forgive him for everything, if only he could stay on the path. But, my friends, addiction is a patient predator. It waits in the shadows, watching for a moment of weakness. And Manila. Manila is a city of temptation. The old haunts were still there. The old friends who remembered the party days came crawling back out of the woodwork. Just one drink, Billy, for old time's sake. And that is all it took. The slide was not slow. It was an avalanche. It started with missed morning practices. Then came the smell of alcohol on his breath during training sessions. Then, the erratic behavior returned. He was throwing rocks at the glass house of his second chance. The management of the Patriots tried to help him. They pleaded with him. "Billy, don't do this. We love you. Don't throw this away." But the grip of the bottle was stronger than the love of a nation. In a heartbreaking turn of events, less than a year after his triumphant return, Billy Ray Bates was fired, again, for repeated misconduct. The Hall of Fame jacket was still fresh in his closet, and he was already being asked to leave. He didn't just lose a job, he broke the hearts of millions of people who wanted to believe that people can change. He was put on a plane back to the U.S., not as a hero this time, but as a tragedy. The Black Superman had proven that while he could fly over defenders, he could not fly away from himself. The door to his paradise slammed shut, this time forever. And so, the curtain falls. The lights of the Araneta Coliseum have dimmed. The roar of 25,000 screaming fans has faded into the hum of a refrigerator in a small, quiet apartment. Billy Ray Bates is back in America, but he is not the man who flew. He is the man who landed. Today, if you saw him walking down the street, you wouldn't see Black Superman. You would see an elderly man moving slowly, his knees grinding from years of defying gravity on concrete courts and hardwood floors. You would see a man carrying the heavy, invisible luggage of a life lived at maximum velocity. He is a ghost in his own country. To the young kids wearing the latest signature sneakers, the name Billy Ray Bates means nothing. They don't know that this man, shuffling to the grocery store, once possessed a vertical leap that made grown men weep with envy. They don't know that, in a galaxy far away, in the Philippines, he is still considered a deity. This is the ultimate tragedy of his story. It is a tale of two worlds. In one world, he is a caution, a what not to do, a name whispered by coaches to scare rookies straight. Don't end up like Bates, they say. In the other world, he is a legend, a myth, a giant who walked among mortals. He gave an entire nation moments of pure, unadulterated joy. Does that count for something? Does the joy he brought to millions outweigh the pain he inflicted on himself? When we look at the life of Billy Ray Bates, we are forced to ask the most painful question in all of sports. What if? What if he had been born 10 years later, in an era where mental health and addiction support were better understood? What if he had a mentor who could have reached him? What if he had just said no to that first drink in a Portland bar? He had the talent to be Michael Jordan before Michael Jordan. He had the charisma to be a global icon. But talent, my friends, is only the engine. Discipline is the steering wheel. And Billy Ray drove a Ferrari with no steering wheel, straight off a cliff, laughing all the way down. He wasn't a bad man. By all accounts, he was a generous, simple soul who just wanted to be loved. But he was a man who never learned how to live when the ball stopped bouncing. He was a victim of his own gift. He thought the rules of gravity didn't apply to him, not on the court and not in life. But gravity always wins. It pulls us all down eventually. For Billy Ray, the fall was just much, much higher than for the rest of us. So, the next time you see a highlight reel of a young superstar, the next time you see a dunk that defies physics, remember the man from Mississippi. Remember the cotton fields. Remember the knife at the gas station. And remember the Black Superman, because his story is a brutal reminder that even if you can fly, you still have to know how to land.